In the late 1970s, Dodge was standing on the edge of a crisis that few people outside the company truly understood. The American truck market was beginning to change, not slowly, but violently. Fuel prices were climbing, emissions rules were tightening, and buyers were discovering that diesel engines were not just for heavy equipment anymore. They were more efficient, they lasted longer, and they made sense for anyone who used their truck to earn a living. Ford and General Motors were already experimenting with diesel power, and Dodge, a company that had built its reputation on big gasoline engines and muscle car culture, suddenly found itself dangerously behind. Dodge needed a diesel engine, and it needed one fast. What it did not have was the time, money, or internal expertise to design a true heavy-duty diesel from the ground up. A proper diesel requires a completely different kind of engineering philosophy. The block has to be thicker, the crankshaft has to be stronger, the bearings have to be larger. Cooling systems must handle far more heat. Combustion pressures are dramatically higher than anything a gasoline engine ever experiences. Building a diesel is not just about changing how fuel is delivered. It is about building a structure that can survive those forces for hundreds of thousands of miles. But Dodge did not have years to develop such an engine. The market was already moving. So instead, it took a shortcut. That shortcut became the 331. The 331 was based on a gasoline engine architecture that had been hastily converted to run on diesel fuel. On the surface, it looked like a reasonable solution. The displacement was there. The size was right. With some modifications, it could be adapted to burn diesel instead of gasoline. But under the surface, this decision would prove disastrous. A gasoline block is not designed to withstand diesel compression ratios. A gasoline crankshaft is not meant to absorb the constant pounding of diesel combustion. The 331 was being asked to do something it was never built to do. When the engine was introduced, Dodge marketed it as a serious step into the diesel future. Buyers were told they could now get diesel efficiency and durability in a Dodge truck. For a brief moment, it seemed like Dodge had pulled it off. The truck started easily. They made decent torque. Fuel economy was noticeably better than gasoline models. For customers desperate to escape rising fuel costs, the 331 looked like a lifeline. But it did not take long for reality to set in. The engine began to show cracks almost immediately, both literally and figuratively. Overheating became common. Cylinder heads warped, head gaskets failed. Cooling systems struggled to keep temperatures under control, especially when the truck was used for what pickups are actually used for: towing, hauling, and working under load. Diesel engines generate enormous heat, and the 331's cooling capacity simply was not designed to handle it. Internally, the problems were even worse. The crankshaft was undersized for the loads it was being subjected to. Main bearings wore rapidly. Connecting rods saw stresses they were never engineered to endure. Uneven combustion caused by imperfect fuel delivery led to vibration and localized hotspots inside the cylinders. That heat damaged pistons. That damage increased blow-by. That blow-by increased oil contamination. The engine entered a spiral where every small weakness fed into a larger failure. Owners who had bought these trucks expecting diesel longevity were stunned. Many engines failed well before 100,000 miles. Some did not make it to 50,000. For diesel buyers, that was unforgivable. Diesel engines were supposed to outlast the truck. The 331 barely outlasted its warranty. Mechanics quickly learned to dread seeing a 331 roll into their bays. Repairs were difficult and expensive, and worse, they were often temporary. Fixing one failure did not solve the underlying design problem. Replacing a head gasket did nothing to strengthen a weak block. Installing new bearings did not change the fact that the crankshaft was marginal. Every time the engine was put back into service, it was only a matter of time before something else failed. Dodge attempted to issue updates. Cooling systems were revised. Fuel systems were tweaked. Minor internal changes were made. But no amount of patching could change the basic truth. The 331 was not a true diesel. It was a gasoline engine trying to survive as something it was not. Word spread quickly through the trucking community. Fleet operators avoided Dodge diesels. Independent owners warned each other. Dealerships were overwhelmed with warranty claims. Dodge's reputation in the diesel market collapsed almost as soon as it had begun. The timing could not have been worse. Just as Dodge was trying to establish itself as a serious diesel player, its first attempt had turned into a liability. Buyers who might have chosen Dodge were instead going to competitors. The company was losing not just sales, but trust. Inside Dodge, the situation was becoming desperate. The 331 was not just a failed engine. It was a strategic disaster. Dodge knew it could not afford to get diesel wrong a second time. If it did, it would be locked out of the fastest-growing segment of the truck market for a generation. That realization forced a hard choice. Dodge could either walk away from diesel altogether, or it could admit that it did not know how to build a real one and find someone who did. That search would lead Dodge to a company that understood diesel better than almost anyone in America. But before that partnership could save the brand, the damage caused by the 331 had to run its course. The 331 would never be remembered the way other diesel engines are. There would be no nostalgia for it, no restoration projects, no legends built around its sound or power. It would fade quietly into history, overshadowed by what came next. But its failure would leave a permanent mark on Dodge's future. Because sometimes, the engines that matter most are not the ones that succeed, but the ones that fail so badly they force a company to change everything. By the time Dodge finally accepted that the 331 could not be saved, the damage to its reputation was already deep and spreading. Truck buyers talk to each other. Mechanics talk even more. A diesel engine's reputation lives and dies in repair shops, not in advertising. And the 331 had already earned a reputation that could not be undone. Stories of cracked heads, blown gaskets, and overheated engines traveled from dealership to dealership and from truck stop to truck stop. What had been marketed as Dodge's future had become something buyers were warned away from. Inside Dodge, the pressure was mounting. Diesel was no longer optional in the truck market. It was becoming essential. Farmers wanted torque. Contractors wanted durability. Long-haul operators wanted fuel economy. Every serious truck manufacturer was moving toward diesel power, and Dodge was at risk of being locked out of that future. The 331 was not just a failed engine, it was a strategic disaster that threatened the entire truck division. What made the situation worse was that the problems could not be fixed with simple updates. Dodge engineers understood that no matter how many gaskets were replaced or cooling systems improved, the core of the engine was wrong. The block was too light. The bottom end was too weak. The entire architecture had been borrowed from a gasoline engine that was never meant to survive diesel pressures. There was no upgrade that could change that reality. The 331 had reached the end of what it could be. That realization forced Dodge into an uncomfortable position. If the company wanted to survive in the diesel market, it had to admit that it did not know how to build a real diesel engine. For a company that prided itself on engineering and independence, that was a hard thing to accept. But the alternative was worse. Walking away from diesel entirely would have left Dodge behind as competitors surged ahead. The solution was to find someone who already knew how to build diesels the right way. That search led Dodge to Cummins, a company that had built its entire identity around diesel engines for heavy trucks, generators, and industrial equipment. Cummins engines were not adapted gasoline designs. They were purpose-built from the ground up for high compression, massive torque, and long service life. When Dodge approached Cummins, it was not with confidence, it was with necessity. The 331 had proven what Dodge was not. Cummins represented what Dodge needed. The partnership that followed was not just a business deal, it was a reset. Dodge agreed to do something it had never done before. Put another company's engine under the hood of its trucks. That decision was risky, But it was also honest. Dodge was choosing reliability over pride. When the first Cummins-powered Dodge pickups reached customers, the contrast with the 331 was impossible to ignore. These engines did not struggle under load. They did not overheat. They did not consume themselves internally. They behaved like what they were, industrial diesel engines placed inside pickup trucks. They pulled hard. They ran cool. They lasted. Truck owners who had been burned by the 331 were cautious at first, but the Cummins engines proved themselves in the only way that mattered, through work. They hauled heavy trailers. They climbed long grades. They ran hundreds of thousands of miles. Slowly, Dodge's diesel reputation was rebuilt. Not through marketing, but through reliability. The irony is that none of this would have happened without the 331. If Dodge's first diesel had been merely average, the company might have continued building its own engines. It might never have sought out Cummins. The disaster of the 331 forced Dodge to change course in a way that success never would have. As the years passed, Cummins-powered Dodge trucks became some of the most respected pickups on the road. They developed their own following. Owners modified them, raced them, and relied on them. The engine under the hood became a selling point more powerful than the badge on the grille. Meanwhile, the 331 faded into obscurity. There were no enthusiasts preserving it, no restorers bringing it back. It did not earn nostalgia, it earned silence. Trucks equipped with it were scrapped, converted, or forgotten. The engine that was supposed to launch Dodge into the diesel era became the one no one wanted to remember. But history has a way of preserving even its mistakes. The 331 remains an important chapter, not because it was good, but because it was catastrophic. It showed what happens when a company tries to shortcut diesel engineering. It showed that a true diesel cannot be rushed or improvised. And it showed Dodge exactly what it had to become if it wanted to survive. The Cummins era that followed would make Dodge one of the most respected names in diesel pickups. That success traces directly back to the failure of the 331. Without that disaster, Dodge might never have changed. And without change, it might never have survived. The 331 did not just fail. It forced Dodge to find the engine that would define its future.